In this section, we'll look at the Suez Crisis, which was provoked in Egypt by Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian ruler. Nasser was increasingly moving towards the Soviet Communist bloc, which worried Eisenhower. 1956 was a momentous year in several ways. Nasser in Egypt wanted to build a dam on the Nile River at Aswan, and that would be something that would, increase arable land and stimulate industrial expansion to be a hydroelectric dam. The British and American governments obviously wanted to see if they could cultivate better relations with them, and they offered some $200 million to underwrite the initial construction, and the World Bank would advance another $200 million when preliminary work was completed. Nasser, however, rejected the Anglo-American offer in January 1956 on the ground that it threatened Egyptian independence. He also hinted that better terms were available in Moscow. When Dulles, in June 1956, heard rumors of a $1 billion Russian loan to finance the Aswan Dam, he informed the Egyptian ambassador that the United States had decided not to participate in the project. This is going to quickly devolve into one of the most serious international crises since Korea. Nasser reacted precipitously. He nationalized the Suez Canal Company in July 1956, and what he said he was going to do was he was going to charge people to pass through the Suez Canal. He sent in troops to the Suez, and he was going to use the proceeds to build his own dam. The canal, he argued, lay in Egyptian territory, and the company that operated it held an Egyptian charter and was subject to Egyptian law. And so he felt that he was in his rights to seize the canal. Of course, whoever controlled the Suez Canal had their hands on the jugular of economic prosperity in Europe. The canal carried about 100 million tons of cargo a year, 3/5 of which was Middle Eastern oil bound for Western Europe. And if the Egyptians got a hold of the canal and didn't allow passage through, then obviously all the oil would have to go all the way around the Cape of Good Hope at the bottom of South Africa. That'd be a journey of like 8,000 miles. Israel, of course, was worried that it wouldn't get supplies through the Suez Canal if the Egyptians ran it. And so they ended up launching a surprise sudden invasion of Egypt across the Sinai on October 29, 1956. And their rapid advance across the peninsula towards the canal gave Great Britain and France a pretext for their own assault. On the excuse that they had the right to insulate the canal from Israeli-Egyptian hostilities, Britain and France sent an ultimatum to Cairo and Tel Aviv on October 30th. They demanded an end to the fighting, a 10-mile withdrawal of all military forces in the canal, and a temporary right for them to occupy positions along the route in order to safeguard free transit. When Nasser ignored their ultimatum, they then began an aerial bombardment of Cairo and the canal. The attack coincided almost exactly with the ill-fated Hungarian revolt. The American leaders, Eisenhower, was completely caught off guard, and they were ticked off because they hadn't been consulted and not even notified in advance. They recognized that Britain and France and Israel were acting under provocation, but they couldn't condone an action that betrayed so many commitments. It violated the charters of both the UN and the North Atlantic Alliance. It really risked driving the Arab oil-rich countries further into the Soviet camp. And Eisenhower was working with diplomacy and had high hopes that he could resolve the issue short of war. As negotiations continued, the UN General Assembly agreed to an American-sponsored ceasefire resolution by a huge majority on November, just a few days before Eisenhower's re-election. The General Assembly did not condone the actions, obviously, of Britain and France, and it was a rare time that the United States opposed those countries in the UN. Belligerent threats from Moscow, meanwhile, added to the tension. When the Soviet Union proposed a joint American-Soviet military action to end the fighting, the Kremlin avowed that it was ready to crush the aggressors and restore peace through the use of force on its own. This sort of worried the British, and they agreed to accept the ceasefire. And eventually, Eisenhower was able to get an agreement that allowed for an increased Egyptian control of the canal, but assurances that the French and British and all other countries would have thorough access. This ended the so-called Suez Canal crisis. Eisenhower was, of course, growing increasingly concerned that the Suez Crisis in 1956 had really driven all the Arab countries, the oil-rich Arab countries, into the Soviet bloc. Therefore, he encouraged Congress to pass a bill that allowed for $200 million for economic and military assistance to any Middle Eastern nation that desired it. This is going to become known as the Eisenhower Doctrine. The Eisenhower Doctrine had some flaws in it and a lot of ambiguities and omissions. It deliberately left out anything about the Suez or the Arab-Israeli disputes and kind of left it to the United Nations. It didn't precisely cover it specified the area covered, and it couldn't be implied until a nation requested assistance. In any event, Nasser and the Soviet Union both rejected it as an example of American economic imperialism. When, however, Nasser began to exert a little Arab nationalism in the Eastern Mediterranean, this worried some of the rulers there, especially in Lebanon and Jordan, where there was a lot of turmoil. And the end result was that Eisenhower sent the Sixth Fleet to the Eastern Mediterranean, and it sort of shored up governments in Jordan and Lebanon with the Eisenhower Doctrine money that were open to American interest. This concludes this section on the Suez Crisis in 1956.